Alberta's push for separation from Canada has reached a critical turning point. In a historic and controversial vote, the province sent a clear message. Its future in the Canadian Federation is far from guaranteed. The results have left Ottawa scrambling to hold the country together and sparked a national debate over unity, identity, and control. What pushed Alberta to the edge? Could this dramatic shift reshape Canada's political and economic future? And might other provinces follow Alberta's lead, triggering a wave of discontent across the Federation? Let's break down what triggered this crisis, what it means for the rest of the country, and where Canada might go from here. Historical background of Alberta's separatism. Alberta's story of wanting to break away from Canada goes back many decades. This western province has felt left out and ignored by the federal government in Ottawa for a long time. In the 1930s, during the Great Depression, many Albertans were angry about how the federal government handled the economic crisis. They felt Ottawa wasn't doing enough to help them. This led to the rise of the Social Credit Party, which won the provincial election in 1935. While not openly separatist, the party pushed for more provincial control. The 1970s brought new tensions when Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau introduced the National Energy Program, NEP. This program controlled oil prices and put extra taxes on Alberta's oil industry. People in Alberta were furious. They saw it as Eastern Canada stealing their resources and wealth. A popular bumper sticker at the time read, "Let the Eastern bastards freeze in the dark." This period planted seeds of distrust that still grow today. In the 1980s, a group called Western Canada Concept gained some support. They wanted Alberta to become its own country. Though they won only one seat in a by-election, their ideas showed how some Albertans felt disconnected from the rest of Canada. The West Wants In movement of the 1990s wasn't about leaving Canada, but rather about Western provinces having more say in national decisions. This led to the Reform Party, which later became part of the Conservative Party of Canada. By the early 2000s, the Firewall Letter became important. Future Prime Minister Stephen Harper and others wrote this letter suggesting Alberta should build a firewall to protect itself from federal policies. They wanted Alberta to take control of healthcare, pensions, and policing, areas usually managed by the federal government. Oil prices and pipelines became hot topics in the 2010s. Many Albertans felt that other provinces, especially British Columbia and Quebec, were blocking pipeline projects that would help Alberta's economy. They saw this as unfair treatment. The election of Justin Trudeau as Prime Minister in 2015 made things worse. His environmental policies, including the carbon tax, were seen as a tax on Alberta's oil industry. Some Albertans started talking more openly about separation. In 2019, a new movement called Wexit, combining West and Exit, gained attention after the federal election. Many Albertans felt their votes didn't matter since Trudeau won despite getting almost no support in Alberta. The COVID-19 pandemic added more tension. Some Albertans thought federal health measures went too far and hurt their freedoms and businesses. Throughout this history, several key factors have driven separatist feelings. Alberta wants more say over its oil and gas. Many Albertans believe they pay too much to the federal government and get too little back. Alberta's more conservative values often clash with policies from Ottawa. With a smaller population than Ontario and Quebec, Alberta feels it doesn't have enough power in national decisions. While most Albertans don't actually want to leave Canada, these feelings of being treated unfairly have created a strong regional identity and ongoing calls for more independence within the Canadian system. But in recent years, those calls for independence have grown louder and more organized. Recent developments and the historic vote. Alberta's path towards separation from Canada has picked up speed in recent years. Let's look at how we got to this historic vote. In 2019, frustration in Alberta reached a boiling point. Many Albertans felt that their province wasn't being treated fairly by the federal government in Ottawa. That year, the Wexit movement, short for Western Exit, gained thousands of followers. People started talking seriously about Alberta becoming its own country. The COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 made things worse. When the federal government made decisions about lockdowns and health measures, many Albertans felt these rules didn't work for their province. They believed Ottawa was making one-size-fits-all policies without understanding Alberta's unique needs. Premier Danielle Smith became a key figure in this story. After winning leadership of the United Conservative Party in 2022, she made Alberta's independence a central part of her message. Unlike previous leaders who just complained about Ottawa, Smith took action. In early 2023, Smith introduced the Alberta Sovereignty Act. This law was designed to give Alberta the power to ignore federal laws that the provincial government believed harmed Alberta's interests. Critics called it unconstitutional, but supporters saw it as Alberta finally standing up for itself. The oil and gas industry played a huge role in pushing for separation. When the federal government introduced stricter environmental regulations and carbon taxes, many Albertans saw this as an attack on their main industry. Oil workers and company owners became some of the strongest voices for independence. By mid-2023, a petition for a separation referendum gathered over 500,000 signatures, an impressive number in a province of about 4.5 million people. The provincial government couldn't ignore these voices anymore. In the fall elections of 2023, pro-separation candidates won in many districts across Alberta. These politicians ran on platforms promising to give Albertans a chance to vote on their future. Premier Smith announced in January 2024 that a historic vote would take place. All Albertans would get to decide if they wanted to start the process of separating from Canada. The question on the ballot was simple: should Alberta begin negotiations to become an independent nation? The campaign leading up to the vote was intense. Those supporting separation pointed to years of economic policies from Ottawa that they believed hurt Alberta. They talked about how Alberta sends billions in tax dollars to other provinces but doesn't get fair treatment in return. Those against separation warned about the huge challenges of becoming a new country. They talked about issues like currency, trade agreements, and what would happen to people's Canadian citizenship. On voting day, turnout was the highest Alberta had ever seen for any election or referendum. People lined up for hours at polling stations. Young voters showed up in record numbers, understanding that this decision would shape their future. When the votes were counted, the results shocked many Canadians. Alberta had taken the first step toward potentially becoming its own nation, setting the stage for what would be complicated negotiations with the federal government in Ottawa. Now, both provincial and federal leaders are navigating uncharted waters. Government response and actions. After the historic vote, both the Alberta and federal governments found themselves in uncharted territory. The provincial government, led by Premier Danielle Smith, wasted no time putting plans into action. Premier Smith called an emergency meeting with her cabinet the day after the vote. She announced the creation of a new ministry, the Ministry of Alberta Sovereignty, to handle the complex process of potentially breaking away from Canada. Smith appointed a senior member of her party to lead this ministry, giving them the job of figuring out what separation might actually look like. The Alberta government also started working on the Alberta First Act, a bill that would give the province the power to ignore certain federal laws if they believed those laws hurt Alberta's interests or stepped on provincial rights. This act would let Alberta collect its own income taxes instead of having the federal government do it, and would give the province more control over natural resources like oil and gas. Premier Smith reached out to other western provinces too, hoping to build alliances. She met with the premiers of Saskatchewan and Manitoba to discuss shared concerns about Ottawa's control over their economies. Meanwhile, in Ottawa, the federal government's response was swift but careful. The Prime Minister called the vote concerning, but reminded Albertans that separation would be extremely complicated and potentially harmful to both Alberta and Canada. The federal government formed a special task force called the Alberta-Canada Relations Committee to address the province's concerns. They promised to review how money is shared between provinces and to look at ways Alberta could have more say in decisions that affect its economy. Federal ministers traveled to Alberta to meet with business leaders, trying to calm fears about what might happen next. They promised new investments in Alberta's energy sector and infrastructure projects to create jobs. The Justice Minister also made it clear that any attempt to separate would face legal challenges. He pointed out that the Canadian Constitution doesn't have a clear path for provinces to leave, and that courts would likely get involved if Alberta tried to separate unilaterally. In response to Alberta's complaints about unfair treatment, the federal government announced a review of the equalization payment system, the way money gets shared between richer and poorer provinces. They also promised to speed up approval for some oil pipeline projects that had been delayed. Both sides started setting up formal negotiation teams. Premier Smith named 5 representatives to speak for Alberta, while the Prime Minister appointed his own team of negotiators. These teams were tasked with finding compromises that might keep Alberta in Canada while addressing the province's concerns. The Bank of Canada warned about economic uncertainty if the situation continued, noting that investors were becoming nervous about putting money into Alberta businesses with the future so unclear. As weeks passed, the tone from both governments shifted from confrontation to cautious dialogue. Premier Smith stated publicly that her goal was a new deal for Alberta within Canada, rather than immediate separation. The federal government, while standing firm on national unity, showed willingness to discuss meaningful changes to how the federation works. But what does the public think, and how are different voices weighing in on Alberta's bold move? Public sentiment and stakeholder reactions. The idea of Alberta separating from Canada has been gaining attention lately, especially after a recent vote that surprised many people. Let's look at what Albertans actually think about this and how different groups are responding. Recent polls show that about 25% of Albertans support the idea of separation. This number has grown over the past 5 years, up from just 13% in 2018. A survey by the University of Alberta found that frustration with Ottawa, Canada's capital, is the main reason people support breaking away. Many Albertans feel that the federal government doesn't listen to their concerns or respect their contributions to the country. However, most Albertans, about 58% according to the latest polls, still want to stay in Canada. They worry about practical problems like creating a new currency, dealing with trade agreements, and figuring out citizenship issues. The remaining 17% say they're undecided and want more information before making up their minds. Different groups in Alberta have different opinions on separation. Oil and gas companies, which are super important to Alberta's economy, have mixed feelings. Some bigger companies worry that separation would make it harder to sell their products to other countries, while smaller companies think they might face fewer environmental rules if Alberta were independent. Indigenous groups in Alberta, including the Treaty 6, 7, and 8 First Nations, mostly oppose separation. Their leaders have pointed out that their treaties are with the Canadian government, not Alberta. They're concerned that separation might threaten their rights and the agreements they've worked hard to establish. The Métis Nation of Alberta has also expressed serious concerns about what separation would mean for their people. Alberta's main political parties are divided on this issue. The United Conservative Party, which currently runs the provincial government, hasn't officially supported separation, but has used the threat of it to try to get better deals from Ottawa. Some members of the party have formed a separation-friendly wing called the Free Alberta Strategy Group. The New Democratic Party, which is the main opposition, strongly opposes separation and argues that Alberta should work within Canada to solve its problems. Business groups like the Calgary Chamber of Commerce worry about the economic uncertainty that separation talk creates. They point out that it might scare away new companies from setting up in Alberta. Meanwhile, farmers and ranchers are concerned about how separation would affect their ability to sell crops and livestock to other provinces and countries. Young Albertans tend to be less supportive of separation than older generations. A youth survey showed that only 18% of Albertans under 25 support the idea, compared to 32% of those over 55. Schools and universities report that students are increasingly discussing this topic in classrooms and campus events. The separation movement is strongest in rural areas and smaller cities, while people in Edmonton and parts of Calgary are generally more opposed to the idea. This urban-rural divide shows how different communities within Alberta have different relationships with the rest of Canada. As this debate continues, many Albertans are asking for clear, factual information about what separation would actually mean for their daily lives, rather than emotional arguments from either side. So what if Alberta take the lead? Future implications and potential outcomes. If Alberta actually separated from Canada, the effects would ripple through both the province and the entire country. Let's explore what might happen if this idea moved from talk to reality. For Alberta's economy, separation would bring both opportunities and serious challenges. The province would gain complete control over its oil and gas resources, allowing it to set its own rules about development and environmental standards. This could potentially boost production in the short term, especially for the smaller companies that have supported separation. However, Alberta would face immediate trade problems. Right now, Alberta's products move freely throughout Canada. After separation, new trade barriers might appear, making it harder and more expensive to sell sell goods to other provinces. The province would need to negotiate new trade deals, not just with Canada, but with the United States and other countries. This process could take years and create uncertainty for businesses. Alberta would also need to create its own currency or adopt another one, like the US dollar. Either choice would affect everything from mortgages to grocery prices. The province would need to build new systems for things Canadians take for granted, like mail delivery, passports, and military protection. For everyday Albertans, separation would raise practical questions about citizenship. Would they remain Canadian citizens? Would they need passports to visit family in other provinces? Would their healthcare coverage continue when traveling in Canada? These uncertainties explain why many of the 58% who oppose separation worry about these day-to-day issues. The Indigenous communities in Treaties 6, 7, and 8 would face particularly complex challenges. Their agreements are with the Canadian government, not Alberta. Separation could force them to renegotiate their rights and relationships, creating legal battles that might last decades. The Métis Nation of Alberta would face similar concerns about protecting their hard-won rights. For the rest of Canada, losing Alberta would be a major economic blow. Alberta contributes significantly to federal tax revenue, and losing this income would affect government programs across the country. Other provinces might face higher taxes or reduced services to make up the difference. The political landscape would shift dramatically too. Without Alberta's 34 seats in Parliament, the balance of power in Canadian politics would change. Conservative parties would lose a traditional stronghold, potentially giving more influence to Central and Eastern Canada. Separation could also trigger similar movements in other provinces with regional frustrations. Saskatchewan, which shares many of Alberta's concerns about Ottawa, might consider following Alberta's path. This could start a domino effect that reshapes the entire country. The urban-rural divide seen in Alberta's separation support might grow even stronger during an actual separation process. Cities like Edmonton, which generally oppose separation, might seek special status or different arrangements than rural areas that support independence. Young Albertans, who show less support for separation, would inherit whatever system emerges. Their futures would be shaped by decisions made today, which explains the increasing discussions in schools and universities about what separation would really mean. As the debate continues, both sides need to move beyond emotional arguments to address these practical realities. The 17% of undecided Albertans are asking important questions about how separation would affect their daily lives, jobs, and futures in concrete ways.